Let's take a look at forces for change. Managers today must be ready for change. Almost every organization must adjust to a multicultural environment, demographic changes, immigration, and outsourcing. Technology is continually changing jobs and organizations. Successful organizations are fast on their feet, capable of developing new products rapidly and getting them to market quickly. In other words, they're flexible and require an equally flexible and responsive workforce. Social trends don't remain static either. Organizations must therefore adjust product and marketing strategies continually to be sensitive to changing social trends. Customers, employers, employees, and organizational leaders are increasingly sensitive to environmental concerns. Green practices are quickly becoming expected rather than optional. Not even globalization's strongest proponents imagined the change in world politics that's happened in recent years. Change is all about making things different. Planned change is change activities that are intentional and goal-oriented. Change agents are responsible for managing change activities in organizations. Change agents can be managers or non-managers, current or new employees, or outside consultants. Some change agents look to transform old industries and meet new capabilities and demands. Finding true change agents in long-established organizations can pose unique challenges. Many change agents fail because organization members resist change. We often see change as threatening. Even when employees are shown data that suggests they need to change, they still may feel negatively towards a change and cope by ignoring it, increasing their use of sick time, or simply quitting. Resistance to change doesn't come only in lower levels of the organization. In many cases, higher-level managers resist changes proposed by subordinates, especially if these leaders are focused on immediate performance. Resistance to change can be positive if it leads to open discussion and debate. Change agents can also monitor the resistance to modify the change to fit the preferences of members of the organization. The challenge is managing resistance that is implicit or deferred because these responses, loss of loyalty or motivation, increased errors or absenteeism, are more subtle and more difficult to recognize from what they are. It's worth noting that not all change is good. Rapid, transformational change is risky, so change agents need to think through the full implications carefully. Sometimes, those initiating change fail to realize the full magnitude of the effects or their true cost. 8 tactics can help change agents deal with resistance to change. Communication is more important than ever in times of change. Assuming participants have the expertise to make a meaningful contribution, their involvement can reduce resistance, obtain commitment, and increase the quality of the change decision. When managers or employees have low emotional commitment to the change, they resist it and favor the status quo. Employees are also more accepting of changes when they're committed to the organization as a whole. People are more willing to accept changes if they trust managers implementing them and see them as legitimate. One way organizations can minimize negative impact is to make sure the change is implemented fairly. Procedural fairness is especially important when employees perceive an outcome as negative. Individuals who are emotionally stable, are willing to take risks, and are flexible in their behavior are more likely to accept change. Last on the list of tactics is coercion, the application of direct threats or force on a resistor. Coercion is most effective when some force or pressure is enacted on at least some resistors. No discussion of resistance would be complete without a brief mention of the politics of change. Because change invariably threatens the status quo, it inherently implies political activity. Managers who've spent a long time with an organization and who have achieved a senior position in the hierarchy are often major impediments to change. For them, change can be a very real threat to their status and position. Yet, they may be expected to implement changes. By acting as change agents, they can convey to stakeholders, suppliers, employers, and to customers that they are addressing problems and adapting to a dynamic environment. Of course, as you might guess, when forced to induce change, these legitimate power holders tend to implement incremental change. Radical change is often considered too threatening. Lewin argued that successful change in organizations should follow 3 steps. By definition, status quo is an equilibrium state. To move from equilibrium, to overcome the pressures of both individual resistance and group conformity, unfreezing must happen in one of three ways. For one, the driving forces which direct behavior away from the status quo can be increased. For another, the restraining forces which hinder movement away from equilibrium can be decreased. A third alternative is to combine the first two approaches. Organizations that have been successful in the past are likely to encounter restraining forces because people question the need for change. Once the movement stage begins, it's important to keep momentum going. Organizations that build up to change do less well than those that get to and through it, the movement stage, quickly. When change has been implemented, the new situation must be refrozen so it can be sustained over time. Without this last step, change will likely be short-lived and employees will attempt to revert to previous equilibrium states. The objective of refreezing is to stabilize the situation by balancing the driving and restraining forces. John Kotter built on Lewin's three-step model to create a more detailed approach for implementing change. Kotter began by listening to common mistakes managers make when trying to initiate change. They may fail to create a sense of urgency about the need for change, or they might declare victory too soon. Kotter proposed an 8-step plan for implementing change. Kotter stresses that all 8 steps must be taken in order. Establish a sense of urgency by creating a compelling reason for why change is needed. Form a coalition with enough power to lead the change. Create a new vision to direct the change and strategies for achieving the vision. Communicate the vision throughout the organization. Empower others to act on the vision by removing barriers to change and encouraging risk-taking and creative problem-solving. Plan for, create, and reward short-term wins that move the organization towards the new vision. Consolidate improvements, reassess changes, and make necessary adjustments in new programs. Reinforce the changes by demonstrating the relationship between new behaviors and organizational success. Kotter's first 4 steps essentially extrapolate Lewin's unfreezing stage. Steps 5, 6, and 7 represent movement, and the final step works on refreezing. Kotter provides managers with a more detailed guide for successfully implementing change. Action research is a change process based on the systematic collection and interpretation of data. Its value is in providing a scientific methodology for managing planned change. Action research consists of 5 steps: diagnosis, analysis, feedback, action, and evaluation. The change agent, often an outside consultant in action research, begins by gathering information about problems, concerns, and needed changes from members of the organization. Diagnosis is followed by analysis. What problems do people focus on? What patterns do these problems seem to take? The change agent synthesizes this information into primary concerns, problem areas, and possible action. The third step, feedback, requires sharing with employees what's been found from the first and second steps. The employees, with the help of the change agent, develop action plans for bringing about needed change. Now the action part of the action research is set in motion. The employees and the change agent carry out specific actions they've identified to correct the problem. The final step, consistent with the scientific underpinnings of action research, is evaluation of the action's plan effectiveness, using the initial data gathered as a benchmark. Because action research engages employees so thoroughly in the process, it reduces resistance to change. Once employees have actively participated, the process typically takes on momentum of its own. Organizational development is a collection of methods that try to improve organizational effectiveness. OD methods value human and organizational growth, collaborative and participative processes, and a spirit of inquiry. The change agent may take the lead in OD, but there's a strong emphasis on collaboration. Key groups refers to an early method of changing behavior through unstructured group interaction. Interventions such as diversity training and team building exercises are descendants of this early OD intervention technique. One tool for assessing the attitudes of organizational members, Identifying discrepancies among member perceptions and solving differences is the survey feedback approach. Everyone in an organization can participate in survey feedback about their perceptions and attitudes on a range of topics, including decision making practices, communication effectiveness, and satisfaction. Team building uses high interaction group activities to increase trust and openness among team members, improve coordination efforts, and increase team performance. A major area of concern in OD is dysfunctional conflict among groups. Intergroup development seeks to change groups' attitudes about perceptions of each other. We've considered how organizations can adapt to change. But recently, some OB scholars have focused on a more proactive approach, how organizations can embrace change by transforming culture. Three approaches are managing paradox, innovative culture, and creating a learning organization. In a paradox situation, we're all required to balance tensions across various courses of action. There is a constant process of finding a balancing point, a dynamic equilibrium among shifting priorities over time. Essentially, all management is dealing with constant change and adaptation. Several key paradoxes have been identified. Learning is a paradox because it requires building on the past while rejecting it at the same time. Organizing is a paradox because it calls for setting direction and leading while requiring empowerment and flexibility. And finally, belonging is a paradox between establishing a sense of collective identity and acknowledging our desire to be recognized and accepted as unique individuals. Managers can learn a few lessons from paradox theory, which states the key paradox in management is that there's no final optimal status for an organization. Managers who recognize the importance of balancing paradoxical factors are more effective. Change agents can introduce characteristics to create a culture of innovation and creativity. Innovation, a specialized kind of change, is applied to initiating or improving a product, process, or service. In other words, a better solution. Innovations can range from incremental improvements to radical breakthroughs. Structural variables are one potential source of innovation. A comprehensive review of structure, innovation relationship leads to the following conclusion. Organic structures positively influence innovation. Because they're lower in vertical differentiation, formalization, and centralization, they facilitate the flexibility, adaptation, and cross-fertilization that make the adoption of innovation easier. Innovation contingent rewards positively influence innovation. When creativity is rewarded, firms tend to become more innovative, especially when employees are given feedback on their performance and autonomy in doing their job. Innovation is nurtured when there are slack resources. Having an abundance of resources allows an organization to afford to purchase or develop innovations, bear the cost of instituting them, and absorb failure. Inter-unit communication is high in innovative organizations. These organizations are heavy users of committees, task force, cross-functional teams, and other mechanisms that facilitate interaction across departmental lines. Innovative organizations tend to share a common vision as well as underlying goals. They have a shared sense of purpose. They encourage experimentation and reward both successes and failures. They celebrate mistakes. Innovative organizations also tend to be cohesive, mutually supportive, and encouraging of innovation. A learning organization has developed the continuous capacity to adapt to change. The Dimensions of Learning Organization questionnaire has been adapted to assess the degree of commitment to learning organization principles. Proponents of the learning organization envision it as a remedy for three fundamental problems of traditional organizations. Fragmentation based on specialization creates walls and chimneys that separate different functions into independent silos. An overemphasis on competition often undermines collaboration. Reactiveness misdirects management's attention to solving problems rather than creating. The problem solver tries to make something go away, while the creator tries to bring something new into being. What can managers do to make their firms learning organizations? Establish a strategy. Management needs to make explicit its commitment to change, innovation, and continuous improvement. Redesign the organization's structure. Flattening the structure, eliminating or combining departments, and increasing the use of cross-functional teams reinforce interdependence and reduces boundaries. Reshape the organization's culture. Managers must demonstrate by their actions that taking risks and admitting failures are desirable. This means rewarding people who take chances and make mistakes. They also need to encourage functional conflict. Think about the times you felt stressed during your work life. For many people, these times were caused by organizational change. Researchers are interested in determining the specific causes and mitigating factors of stress to learn how to manage organizational change effectively. The overall findings that organizational changes incorporate OB knowledge of how people react to stressors may yield more effective results than changes that are managed only objectively through goal-setting plans. Not surprisingly, the role of leadership is critical. Managers can be continually working to increase employees' self-efficacy, change-related attitudes, and perceived control over the situation to create this positive change orientation. Often, organizational changes are stressful because some employees perceive aspects of the changes as threatening. To reduce the perception of threat, employees need to perceive the organization changes as fair. Through these methods, managers can help employees keep their stress low and commitment high. Stress is an unpleasant psychological process that occurs in response to environmental pressures. Although stress is typically discussed in a negative context, it also has a positive purpose. Some professionals see the pressures of heavy workloads and deadlines as positive challenges to enhance the quality of work. However, when the situation is negative, stress is harmful and may hinder your progress by elevating your blood pressure uncomfortably and creating an erratic heart rhythm as you struggle to speak and think logically. Researchers have argued that challenge stressors, or stressors associated with workload, operate quite differently from hindrance stressors, or stressors that keep you from reaching your goals. Challenge stressors lead to more motivation, engagement, and performance. Hindrance stressors, on the other hand, appear to have more of a negative effect on employee engagement, job satisfaction, and performance. More typically, stress is associated with demands and resources. Demands are responsibilities, pressures, obligations, and uncertainties that individuals face in the workplace. Resources are factors within an individual's control that he or she can use to resolve the demands. Stress preferences change in cycles. You've experienced this when you sometimes just feel like relaxing and recovering, while at other times you welcome more stimulation and challenge. Much like organizations are in a constant state of change and flux, we respond to stress processes by continually adapting to both internal and external sources, and our stability is constantly redefined. Just as environmental uncertainty influences the design of an organization's culture, it also influences stress levels among employees in that organization. Uncertainty is the biggest reason people have trouble coping with organizational change. Stress shows itself in a number of ways, such as ulcers, irritability, and difficulty making routine decisions. These symptoms fit under three general categories: physiological, psychological, and behavioral symptoms. Most early concern with stress was directed at physiological symptoms because researchers found that stress could create changes in metabolism, increase blood pressure, bring on headaches, and induce heart attack. Job dissatisfaction is an obvious cause of stress, but stress shows itself in other physiological states, for instance, tension, anxiety, irritability, boredom, and procrastination. Behavior-related stress symptoms include reductions in productivity, increases in absences, safety incidents and turnover, changes in eating habits, increased smoking or consumption of alcohol, and sleep disorder. Researchers have begun to differentiate challenge and hindrance stressors, showing that these two forms of stress have opposite effects on job behaviors, especially performance. A meta-analysis of more than 35,000 individuals showed role ambiguity, role conflict, role overload, job insecurity, environmental uncertainty, and situational constraints were all consistently and negatively related to job performance. There's also evidence that challenge stress improves job performance in a supportive work environment. Employees and management may differ on what constitutes an acceptable level of stress on the job. An employee can and should take personal responsibility for reducing stress levels. Individual strategies that have proven effective include physical exercise, relaxation techniques, and social support networks. Many people manage their time poorly. Time management skills can help minimize procrastination by focusing efforts on immediate goals and boosting motivation even in the face of tasks that are less enjoyable. Several organizational factors that cause stress can be controlled by management. Improved training, goal setting, organizational communication, employee involvement, and corporate wellness programs may all contribute. Individuals perform better when they have specific and challenging goals and receive feedback on their progress towards those goals. Goals can reduce stress as well as provide motivation. Redesigning jobs to give employees more responsibility, more meaningful work, more autonomy, and increased feedback can reduce stress because these factors give employees greater control over work activities. Increasing formal organizational communication with employees reduces uncertainty by lessening role ambiguity and role conflict. Organizations supported wellness programs focus on employees' total physical and mental condition. These typically provide workshops to help employees improve their physical and psychological health. Most firms that have introduced wellness programs have found significant benefits.